The Consolidated aircraft is credited for almost two-thirds of all the submarines sunk by the Americans during the World War II. It has been reported that 25 out of the 60 submarines sunk by the US Navy during the war went down under the bombers from PBYs. In addition, another 13 were destroyed by the PB-4Ys, the Navy version of the B-24 Liberator. The Consolidated PBY Catalina, or Pigboat, was one of the most versatile and effective multi-role aircraft of World War II. PBY Catalinas were primarily used for air-sea rescue operations, cargo transport, convoy bombing, and anti-submarine warfare. It's estimated that they destroyed over 40 enemy U-boats in the Atlantic and Pacific between 1941 and 1945, becoming the ultimate submarine hunter. When World War I broke out, Reuben Hollis Fleet transitioned from an aviation enthusiast to a licensed pilot. He began writing for the school newspaper while he was a 15-year-old student at Culver Military Academy. Following careers as a teacher and a real estate agent, Fleet enlisted in the Washington National Guard. After enrolling in the aviation program at the U.S. Army Signal Corps in 1917, he was promoted to head the 18th Aero Squadron. The first U.S. airmail service between New York and Washington, D.C. was launched by Fleet the following year. The Airborne Postal Service started out with this. Following his service in the American Aerial Branch, Fleet was finally given the Distinguished Service Medal. And in 1922, he joined Gaudet Aircraft Company after leaving the Army Air Service. A year later, he would establish his own business by combining Gaudet and Return Wright into the newly formed Aircraft Corporation. To start winning the contracts with the Army for new aircraft design, Fleet made one of its first moves by hiring an aeronautical engineer named Isaac McKinley Layton and the future creator of the Bell aircraft, Florence D. Bell. The PT-1 Trustee, a biplane trainee for the Army Air Service and the Navy, represented the company's first successful design and was created in 1924. The company's revenue soared to the point the US Congress singled out Fleet for making excessive profits on the PT-1 trainee. To avoid having to return his gains, Fleet subsequently gave the Army over 50 trainees for $1. In the 1920s and 30s, Consolidated aircraft became well known as a result of this decision, which sparked the creation of a popular line of flying boats. A monoplane patrol aircraft with a better range and cargo capacity than the PTY and Martin P-3M was requested by the US Navy in 1933 from Douglas and Consolidated aircraft companies. The Navy and the US military service worried that the tensions with Japan might eventually lead to an armed confrontation and wanted to be prepared. The US requested an aeroplane that was capable of crossing the Pacific Ocean on its own after Japan invaded Manchuria, putting all of China, the American assets there as well as its territorial aspirations in danger. Consolidated's Isaac Glidden made the decision to build his subsequent invasion on the company's successful PGY Sesqui aircraft flying boat. Model 28, a completely metal creation, was the end product. The Navy was drawn to the aircraft because of its distinctive characteristics, which featured a parasol-mounted wing with internal bracings that reduced the need for external struts and retractable stabilizing floats that folded forward to create wingtips in its flights. Although the two-step hole design was identical to that of the PGY, Model 28 had a special cruciform tail unit instead of a strut-based twin tail. Better aerodynamic performance followed from this. Pratt & Whitney R1830-58 engines with a combined output of nearly 830 horsepower apiece propelled the Model 28. They were both positioned in the middle of the wing leading margins. The weaponry comprised 430 caliber Browning M2 machine guns and up to 2,000 pounds of explosives. The crew may be of 7 people, but 10 would be preferable, and the cost of each aircraft was projected to be around $90,000. The contract to combine for the production of 60 aircraft was given since the design satiated all of the Navy's needs. Fleet relocated the business to San Diego, California, where the prototypes were tested in September 1935. Model 28 made a record-breaking, non-stop 3,443-mile journey from Norfolk to San Diego on its first flight. The aircraft was sent to the Navy for additional trial, where it was given the name SPBY-1 following a series of small improvements to increase its efficiency. The Navy also asked it to be converted to a patrol bomber. One of its key changes is the redesign of the vertical tail surface, which eliminated issues with the tail sinking during takeoff. Additionally, the Pratt & Whitney R1830-58 engines were modified to be R1830-64 engines, which had around 900 horsepower apiece. Then, using a PBY, the improved aircraft smashed the Navy record by flying 2,381 miles in 34 hours from Panama to California, while maintaining an average speed of 130 miles per hour. In October 1936, the initial PBYs were sent. Improvements were made throughout the time, and newer models had stronger engines that produced better speeds and ranges. For the manufacturing of the aircraft, licenses were given to the Soviet Union, Canada, and England. The British started referring to it as the PBY Catalina, while the Canadians called it the Kenzo, and the Americans referred to it as the Pigboat. Consolidated aircraft, which employed over 25,000 people actively as 1941 drew near, also rose to become the San Diego's biggest employer, eventually employing over 40,000 people. Fleet quit his job and started working as a private consultant for the President Roosevelt after the attack on the Pearl Harbor and the inevitable US entry into the war. World War II saw the production of more than 3,300 PBY Catalinas. In particular, they were employed for anti-submarine warfare during search and rescue operations, as well as for patrol bombing, transport, and convoy escort. The Pacific theater against the Japanese was where the PBY really shined, although serving on all the fronts. PBY-5A was the most prevalent variation. There were two 30 caliber machine guns in the bow turret, one 50 caliber Browning MG in each waist blister, and one 30 caliber MG in ventral tunnel, and 4,000 pounds of ammunition, totaling depth charges, torpedoes, and bombs. The 179 miles per hour speed limit made PBYs sluggish, but their adaptability made up for it. Thousands of downed airmen and sailors were dispersed throughout the Atlantic and Pacific, and Dumbo and PBY XL were expressly designed to save them. And rather than taking off when there were no more room available for the sailors, the PBY would remain afloat as a lifeboat. Until further rescue operations came, the crew members would then bind the sailors to the ship's wings and other parts. The wounded soldiers were hence shielded from shark attacks in the middle of the ocean. When the Japanese attacked what could have been a Navy yard in the Philippines on December 10, 1941, the combat PBYs, also known as the Cats by their crews, claimed the first PBY enemy aircraft kill. Patrol Squadron 101, made up of 6 Catalina aircraft, was the first American force to attack the Japanese, bombing Jeju Island to cut off their supply lines. On May 26, 1941, a Royal Air Force Catalina flying from Northern Ireland also sighted the German battleship Bessemer heading towards the French port of Brest from a distance of around 800 miles. A task force of more than 20 ships was sent by the British to find the Hunter of the Seven Seas as a result of the sighting. However, Catalina aircraft were also in charge of identifying the Japanese enemy fleet before the Battle of Midway on June 4, 1942. For nighttime operations against the Japanese during the American assault on Guadalcanal, the US Navy's PBYs were painted matte black. They engaged in heavy bombing and torpedoing operations against the Imperial Navy vessels and supply ships. The PBYs were so successful at their disruption operations on the Tokyo Express that special squadrons known as the Black Cats were formed. Equipped with radar and magnetic anomaly detection (MAD) technology and flying in complete darkness, Black Cats bombed several enemy ships and obliterated isolated Japanese sites throughout the Pacific. In the end, the PBYs opened doors to the navies to enter the Sea of Japan and Japanese territory like Okinawa. Additionally, the Royal Australian Air Force utilized its own Catalinas for nighttime hunting. To do as much damage as they could to the Japanese supply line, they dropped mines in the shipping lanes and Japanese-infested waterways. The Australian Catalinas worked with the US submarines to entice the enemy ships into deep seas where they were easy targets. Terror bombs made up of recycled metal, glass bottles, and razor blades, and other things that created high-pitched sounds were also used by the Americans and Australian PBYs to keep the Japanese garrisons awake at night. The Japanese found it challenging to maintain concentration on the Americans in the Philippines as a result of all of these actions. It has also been reported that 25 out of the 60 submarines sunk by the US Navy during the war went down under the bombs from PBYs. In addition, another 13 were destroyed by the PB-4Ys, the Navy version of the B-24 Liberator. The PBY Catalina boat, sometime known as the Black Cat, became the most widely deployed military amphibious boat in history, and it is on display in a number of aircraft museums all across the world. The plane is also credited for almost two-thirds of all the submarines sunk by the Americans during World War II, hence the name Submarine Hunter.